Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a mission to confront, I think, one of the most frustrating and challenging paradoxes of our time.
The carbon paradox.
Exactly. I mean, for decades now, the world has been intensely aware of climate change. We have global summits, we have pledges, huge public movements, and all this technology marketed as the solution.
And yet, when you actually look at the data, the story it tells is, well, it's profoundly simple. It's not working.
Right.
Total global emissions are not slowing down. They are accelerating. So our deep dive today is really about understanding why this structural reliance on fossil fuels is so deep, and crucially, dissecting the limitations of these modern green technologies that have so far completely failed to decarbonize the planet.
Okay, let's unpack this and start with that core data point because it really sets the stage for everything else.
Yeah.
If you've been following climate news since, the early 2000s, you would assume we're making some kind of progress. Slow, maybe, but progress.
You think so, but the opposite is true. The acceleration is it's dramatic. Since the year 2000, humanity has increased its annual carbon dioxide emissions by about 1.5 times.
Wait, say that again? 1.5 times?
Yeah. Think about that. In just 2 decades, we've pushed the amount of carbon we put into the atmosphere up by 50%. Every single year.
That is just staggering. It means that even if some countries are making changes, the global industrial machine as a whole hasn't just failed to break its addiction. It has actually doubled down.
It's doubled down. We're relying more on fossil carbon, not less. It confirms this massive global industrial expansion that is still being fueled almost entirely by these old fuels.
So to really grasp how wild this acceleration is, we need to zoom out, look at the deep context, the conditions that even allowed us to be here in the first place.
Precisely. We tend to forget that humans are a profoundly climate-dependent species.
They really are.
We built everything, agriculture, cities, global trade, during a very unique window of stability. It's called the Holocene.
And that's lasted for about, 11 or 12,000 years?
Roughly 11,700 years, yeah. And during that entire time, atmospheric carbon dioxide was incredibly stable. It stayed right around 280 parts per million. That's stability. That's the bedrock of modern life.
And looking at the ice core records, that stability goes back even further than the Holocene, right? It shows just how narrow this window of normal really is.
Oh, absolutely. The ice cores confirm that for 800,000 years before we started industrializing, a period that saw multiple ice ages, CO2 levels never went above the low 300 parts per million range. That was the ceiling for almost 1 million years.
Okay, so 800,000 years of a stable ceiling.
Yeah.
What have we done in just the last, say, 270 years?
Well, since about 1750, we have just blown past that ceiling. We've pushed atmospheric carbon well above 420 parts per million.
And it's the rate of that increase that's critical.
That is the entire story. We have effectively collapsed 800,000 years of climate stability into a handful of centuries. The speed is orders of magnitude faster than any natural shift the planet has seen.
This context brings us to the stakes, because they're often discussed in these vague, abstract terms, but the projections are terrifyingly concrete. Let's look at the trajectory if we just keep going.
Okay, so let's do a simple thought experiment. If humanity were to emit carbon at the same rate it did in 2024 every single year from now on.
And that's a conservative assumption, given we're still accelerating.
A very conservative assumption. But even with that, atmospheric carbon would hit about 1,000 parts per million in roughly 232 years.
Okay, 1,000 ppm. That sounds like a big, scary number, but what does that actually mean? We need to connect that to Earth's deep history to really get it.
Well, what's fascinating and terrifying is that 1,000 ppm is comparable to the atmospheric estimates for the Permian-Triassic mass extinction.
The Great Dying.
The Great Dying. It happened 252 million years ago. It was the single most profound biological catastrophe in Earth's history. It wiped out something like 90% of all marine species.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. But the crucial difference, the real insight here, has to be the speed, right? The speed of our change versus that ancient disaster.
That is the entire point. That ancient catastrophe was driven by massive volcanic activity in Siberia. It took between 100,000 and 300,000 years to release all of that carbon.
100,000 years.
Minimum. Humans are on a path to approach similar concentrations in just a few centuries.
Yeah.
The rate of injection into the atmosphere is dramatically, violently faster. The climate system, the ecosystems, They have no time to
So
adapt.
this really shifts the whole narrative away from saving the planet to something much more fundamental.
Human self-preservation.
Right. The Earth itself will be fine. It will endure.
Oh, the planet will be fine. It
Yeah. Right.
survived far worse, sharks, crocodiles, insects, microbes. They'll persist. The real danger is to us, to large, complex, heat-sensitive primates who need these very specific, very stable conditions to support a population of 8 billion people. And if these trends continue, the consequences for our civilization become devastatingly practical. We're talking huge populated regions
Yeah.
becoming, well, uninhabitable.
Uninhabitable, global food systems completely destabilized. A population of 8 billion, let alone the 10 billion we're heading for, simply cannot be sustained under those conditions.
So the insight here is that this isn't some moral quest to save nature. It's a fundamentally selfish struggle to preserve the very narrow conditions that allow our civilization to exist.
Exactly. The planet will go on. Our way of life, however, may not.
Which brings us directly to the solutions. If the stakes are this high, why are emissions still accelerating? We are constantly told that solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles, that these are the answer. But the argument we're examining today says this framing is deeply misleading.
It is misleading because of what they are. They are energy conversion tools, not replacement systems.
What's the difference?
They don't operate in a vacuum. They sit on top of and are completely dependent on an overwhelmingly fossil fuel-powered global industrial system. They literally require fossil fuels to even exist.
I get that there's an upfront carbon cost, but doesn't the energy they produce over their lifetime eventually pay off that debt? I mean, that's what the industry always says.
That's the core assumption that really falls apart when you scrutinize the full life cycle. To make a solar panel or an EV battery, you need a massive amount of raw material extraction. You're mining for steel, concrete, copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt.
And all of that, the open pit mining, the heavy machinery, shipping millions of tons of ore around the world, that's all running on diesel and jet fuel.
Almost exclusively. Then the manufacturing itself often happens in places like China and Southeast Asia where the electrical grids are dominated by coal. So you end up with a product that's labeled green in the West, but its birth was powered by heavy fossil fuel use at every single step.
So the carbon cost isn't temporary. It's vast, and it's just been outsourced.
It's outsourced. And this is where the idea of carbon laundering comes in. Fossil fuels are burned to make the thing, but the final product gets a climate-friendly label, it gets subsidized, and it gets praised.
It's a psychological buffer.
It's a psychological and a political buffer. It makes everyone feel like progress is happening, even as total global emissions keep rising, because we're still expanding the underlying fossil fuel base to make the green stuff.
And beyond the manufacturing, what about the technical limitations? I mean, solar and wind are intermittent. That's a huge problem for an industrial grid.
It's a massive challenge. Intermittency means they can't function as standalone replacements. You can't run a city on power that disappears when the sun goes down or the wind stops.
So you need backup.
You need immediate, massive backup. And right now, that backup is almost always natural gas or coal. So the green energy source actually relies on the fossil fuel infrastructure just to be viable.
Okay, what about the EV argument? Shifting transportation to electric is supposed to be the key.
Again, EVs don't eliminate emissions, they just shift them. If you plug your EV into a grid that's 60% coal and gas, you're just moving the pollution from your tailpipe to a smokestack somewhere else.
And that's not even counting the battery production.
Not even counting the huge energy cost of making the battery, which, again, is often coal-powered. When you look at the total life cycle, an EV on a dirty grid can have emissions that approach or sometimes even exceed an efficient modern gasoline car.
So the core issue is that these tools, they don't actually replace the dense, reliable, continuous energy that runs our civilization.
They coexist with it. The solution isn't adding solar panels on top of a dirty grid. It's building systems that can actually displace fossil fuels entirely.
So if we set these conversion tools aside for a moment, what are the proven systems for actual decarbonization? What's the path to getting that continuous, reliable power?
The list is actually pretty short, but the systems on it are highly effective. We're talking about things that can provide massive amounts of constant low carbon power, what we call baseload electricity.
And for anyone listening, can you define baseload power specifically?
Sure. Baseload power is the minimum level of electricity a grid needs, 204/7. It has to be stable, predictable, always on.
Right, to run hospitals, factories, transit systems.
Exactly. A nuclear plant or a large hydroelectric dam, they run pretty much all the time, regardless of the weather. They supply that base. Solar and wind are variable. They add power on top of that base, but they can't be the foundation.
And when you look at what has successfully decarbonized large economies in the past, the list narrows very quickly.
It narrows to nuclear energy and large-scale hydroelectric systems, where they're geographically feasible. Nuclear provides incredibly stable baseload power. Its life cycle emissions are comparable to or even lower than solar and wind. And crucially, it avoids the massive land use requirements and the intermittency problem.
And hydro can provide stable power for centuries. So we have the technology, the solutions exist right now.
We do. The technology is not the barrier here. We know how to do this. The real question is, if the solutions are known and proven, why aren't they being implemented at the scale we need?
So what does it all mean? The core obstacle isn't technology, it's what? Political resistance? Economic inertia.
All of the above. And the sheer momentum of profit structures that favor selling the next subsidized EV over making the huge long-term strategic investment needed for actual survival.
The current approach lets governments and corporations claim they're taking action while they preserve the economic model that profits from fossil fuels at every single stage.
From pulling it out of the ground to manufacturing the so-called green substitute.
So to summarize this deep dive, the data shows a world where carbon emissions are still accelerating, even while we're spending billions on cosmetic solutions that don't actually replace fossil fuels. We seem to be choosing substitutes that preserve profits and appearances over doing what the physics shows would actually work.
And if you connect that to the big picture, just consider the historical judgment. In a few hundred years, a time frame that is nothing in geological terms, it's well within cultural memory, atmospheric carbon levels will be beyond the stable conditions that allowed our civilization to even evolve. We are consciously abandoning the stable climate that created us.
So the final thought is?
The final thought is this. If the solutions are known, accessible, and proven, what does it say about a civilization that chooses the appearance of action, that prioritizes short-term financial models over its own long-term survival? That's the question we leave you with today.